night. I
Yes.
don't know. It is 6 p.m. there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so
6.
Okay.
What do you think, Michele? We can start officially?
Well, we are
So I
40
would
in
like,
the class. Maybe 2 minutes is fine. So just I think all the students
okay.
are joining us. Yeah.
How many students, Michele, do we have here?
19. Here in the class, we are 44. So I guess half of the class, they are finishing maybe in the atelier. We have sent, we have texted them to join, but I think now the list is enlarging. I guess 2 minutes we can start.
Yes, yes. And I saw that there are a lot from China.
Yeah.
And from other countries?
We have 15 different nationalities. So a lot Chinese students, many from India and anyway, Southeast countries. And well, some Italians for sure, not very much, not many. And from other countries all over the world, some from Africa and South America. It's a worldwide workshop.
Perfect.
excellent, very interesting.
Also the teachers, because we have the atelier are led by 3 architect professors. One, Lina, is from Italy. They are also connected, I guess. We have Karim Nader, who is a Lebanese architect from Beirut, and Pedro Campos Costa, who is a Portuguese architect from Lisbon. And you can see also in the panel Professor Dirk Juncker and Professor Juan Carlos Rojas Arias. I guess you can also say hello, because we want to test also your mic. It was not working in the morning. Juan Carlos, can you hear us?
Hi.
Okay.
Can you listen to me?
Yeah,
Hi.
we can. Yeah.
Fine. Great. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
And also from Brazil, Fabiano Lemes, our colleague in Politecnico di Milano. He works a lot on SDGs.
He's Italian, okay.
I'm now a bit Italian.
Italian. And he works a lot on SDGs, so I hope that we can share also his methodology with Rafa and Metro Hub initiative very soon.
I'm looking forward to the session today.
In terms of time, how much I will have for the presentation?
But we plan almost in total 40 minutes. So you can balance if you would like to have also some question and answer. I don't know if students are, so today is the first day of the summer school. So I don't know if they will be so proactive to make questions. Probably at the end of the 2 weeks, they will be much more aware about how to use SDGs. But in total, I guess 40 minutes. I don't know, Michele, if it's right.
Yeah, it's perfect. I think we can.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I will try to take 30 minutes for the presentation and maybe leave 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. I hope participants are not tired, because I know that you started early today, so I hope to be as much as dynamic as possible.
I hope so.
Okay, I think Sarah, we can start. We are more than 70 in the class, so we can. I guess we can officially start with our first lecture.
Okay. I would like just very quickly to welcome Rafael Forero tonight here in this virtual space, which belongs to Politecnico di Milano, but especially to Piacenza campus, where we are holding a master program in sustainable architectural landscape design. And we are starting, this is the introduction lecture, we are starting a summer school where the contribution by Rafa Forero is very crucial, as I mentioned in the morning, because somehow he provides us with a kind of cultural and ethical frame for defining strategies and design proposal for different sites within a very specific and local context, the Piacenza areas in between infrastructures and not sold areas between the old part of the city and the river. So somehow I think I'm really looking forward to listen to this contribution, and I ask now Antonella Contin, who organized this contact, which is so crucial for this edition of the summer school, to introduce Rafa to all the students. Thank you, Antonella.
تحصل مثلا اینجا بودیم.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much to all my colleagues and in particular Michele to organize this event this night. For me, it's a pleasure to host in the space of Piacenza campus the intervention of Rafa Forero as representative of MetroHub initiative. We started with Rafael Forero we joined together a lot of initiative, workshop, seminar in different part of the world, trying to spread the idea that it's possible to territorialize the SDGs. The mission of MetroHub is try to support the metropolitanization of the city in different parts of the globe, trying to demonstrate that it's possible to be part of this process of decision making, even though right now we are speaking of cities that are incommensurably huge and that seem so far away from the need of the person, of the citizen, of the different citizen, fragile citizen that right now live in that metropolitan territory. I could introduce Rafa Forero using his CV, but from my point of view, what is really relevant in the competence of Rafa Forero is the fact that he's an engineer, and in particular a complex system engineer. That is quite strange, no, for an architect like me, so old-fashioned, to work with an engineer that is dealing with complex system. But as we said this morning, the Metropolis is a complex system, and his competence and his expertise is particularly relevant when we have to deal with an exponential phenomenon that is dealing with critical factors such as the metropolitan explosive growth. So for me, the fact that we started to work with Rafa Forero during a lot of architectural and urban design workshops demonstrate how is possible, is fundamental for the metropolitan discipline, or better for the practice of metropolitan discipline, to merge, to include a lot of new disciplines that allow us to share knowledge, trying to depackage the complexity of the urban fact or urban phenomena right now. So I don't want to spend a lot of time presenting Rafa Forero and UNHABITAT initiative. I only would like to say to our student today and our colleague that we would like to, at the end of the summer school, prepare a report for UNHABITAT that we will share with UNHABITAT, so to demonstrate how Piacenza campus was able to interpret that idea of how it's possible to territorialize SDGs, using also our competencies as architect, as urban designer. So please, that is a call to action for our students. Try to understand how it's possible to work with this tool, with SDGs and urban agenda, so that we could demonstrate that it's possible also for our discipline to be part of the construction, of the co-construction of the new metropolitan dimension. So I leave the floor to Rafa Forero. Thank you very much to join us, and thank you very much to UNHABITAT Metro Hub initiative to join us and co-construct with us this new field of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonella. Very happy to be here. Good afternoon again to all of you, and thank you for being connected. In behalf of Unhabitat, let me to congratulate you first to the Polimi for this interesting workshop and summer school, but also to thank you for allowing us to participate, because we definitely think that partnership with universities is the only way to approach to the territory and to really achieve changes and address all these sustainable development challenges. Because let me be clear, although we have projects and offices in more than 50 countries and more than 500 cities, we realize that the territorial challenges are being faster of the world of our capacities. So we definitely cannot make a change alone. We definitely need partners, and we see in these capacity building programs and these capacity building strategies a very important way to do it. So actually, capacity building is one of the main important focus of our new strategic and global plan. So thank you again. Thank you also for that introduction, Antonella. And I also not taking much time in this opening. I know that I have a difficult role today because I am going to take the opening session, the opening lecture, and I hope to do my best and to be dynamic as possible. Let me to warning you, because today I will say some things that could be polemic, but I think that is the idea. I want to encourage the debate and also present some evidence and some recent data that we have from the agency. So I will start to share my screen, and please confirm if you are seeing my presentation.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So I have called the name of this lecture as Territorializing SDGs in Metropolises, and of course, taking the title of you had for the summer school, which is towards a more just, green, and healthy future, and that is also a very interesting title because it corresponds with one of our most recent reports that we will talk about later. So let me start. I will share with you today 4 important points, and this is the first one. The first one is sustainable development challenges are, of course, global, but also they are metropolitan. And let me to elaborate in that statement. We, of course, all know that we are living in a urban world. Today, more than the 50% of the urban population live in cities. We see this figure and these numbers all the days. Exactly, the 56% of the global population is living in cities, which is about 4 billion people, which is, of course, a considerable number. But the main question is how this will be in the future, and mainly how will this be at the end of the century? How many people will be living in cities, or where will be living these people at the end of the century? And also, how will be those cities? Because, of course, we know today how many cities we have, but we don't know in all cases how are those cities. So we are starting to answer those questions, and also to exploring some projections on how will be the global population at the end of the century. And there are some initial hints that tell us that at the end of the century we will be at least 10 billion people. The global population will stabilize in 10 billion people approximately, and in that year and in that time, the 90% of that 10 billion people will be urban. So we will have at the end of the century, we think, this is a hint, of course, a projection, but we think that we will have at least the double of the urban population of today. So you can start to imagine the challenge of having the double of the urban population in cities and in metropolis in the near future, in the coming decades. And of course, if we are saying that mainly of the most of the global population is living in cities, we need to realize that there is a strong relation between cities and sustainable development. And this is not trivial, but it is a relation that you need to explore and to start to understanding. For instance, you can take the SDG 11, which is the one related to sustainable cities and communities, and you can explore in all the different targets of the SDG 11 different relations with another relevant targets in another SDG. So a first picture tells us that the cities and that the sustainable urban development is related with almost all the different sustainable development goals. And this is not difficult to understand. We have here some interesting relationships with, for instance, the SDG 11, which is about the SDG 1, which is about no poverty, or the SDG 2, which is about zero hunger, or with gender equality, clean water and sanitation. And of course, you can start to think that we will not achieve effective climate change, for instance, if we do not improve transport systems in cities, or to protect and safeguard natural heritage. And of course, for instance, we will not achieve sustainable cities if we do not pursue the ideal that all people have the same rights to economic resources, for instance, or access to basic services, or ownership of land and other goods which are related to SDGs 1, 6, 2, 7, 12, 8, and so on. So in short, we know that if we do not care for sustainable cities, maybe we will not achieve sustainable development as a whole. So we need to start to exploring and to find how are these cities today. And the first result that we get in exploring that is that the urban world is really becoming a metropolitan one. So we live in a urban world, of course, as I said at the beginning, but this urban world is mainly metropolitan. And you have this, you have here the map in the world, where are and which are the principal metropolises of the world. All the blue dots that you see in the map are corresponding with metropolises. And of course, of different sizes. You can see in the map metropolises, the common metropolises, or the common idea that we had in the past on metropolis, which are large and big metropolises, or as we call it today, the mega cities, which are cities with more than 10 million inhabitants. But of course, we have another size metropolis in the world, which are actually the mainly group. You can see in the map that the most of the points correspond with metropolis to 300,000 to 1 million inhabitants, and on other group of metropolis, which is 1 million to 5 million inhabitants. So the world is becoming a metropolitan world. The urban world is becoming metropolitan, but also a diverse, a complex size metropolis as well. Of course, you can see as usual and as we know it before, that all the majority of this metropolization process is taking place took place at the beginning at regions as Europe and North America and some part of Asia, and today they are increasing in regions as South America, Africa, and other parts of Asia. When you see this proportion in continents by regional prominence, you can see, of course, that Asia Pacific is leading this growth, because the 56% of the metropolitan population is located in Asia Pacific, and of course the region accounts for more than 1,000 metropolis in total. Let me to go back here, because I don't say something important. In total, you have here almost 2,000 metropolis, 1,934 metropolises around the world in total. But you can see that Asia Pacific had most of the half of them, 1,038 metropolises, and the other regions are more similar in terms of metropolitan populations and number of metropolis. For instance, you can see in the graphic, you can see a similarity between Africa and Latin America, both in metropolitan population and in the number of metropolis. For instance, in the number of metropolis, Africa has 255 metropolis, while Latin America and the Caribbean 215, very similar numbers. And also Western Europe and other states, and let me to clarify this, because we here are using the regional grouping of the United Nations, which not necessarily correspond to the geographical continents, but to the distribution of the UN General Assembly. For instance, you have one group for Africa, one group for Latin America. Europe, you have divided into principal groups, one for Eastern Europe and another for Western Europe and other states, and those other states we will see this in more detail after, but these other states correspond with North America and Australia, because this distribution is more related with socioeconomical and political conditions than with geographical, of course. And you have another group for Asia and Pacific without Australia. So, but this is almost the general distribution of this metropolitan group, metropolitan growth about around the world, no? And this is not only the situation for today, but this will be also the situation for the future. Our most recent projections tell us that the metropolitan population will be continue growing and rapidly. For instance, in net numbers today, we have at least 2.6 billion people living in metropolis. Remember the numbers that I give at the beginning of the presentation. The 56% of the global population, which is about 4 billion people, is living in cities. At turn, within that 4 billion people, 2.6 are living in metropolitan areas, in metropolises, in urban agglomeration. This is almost the 60% of the urban population, or a third of humanity. So a third of humanity is living today in metropolises. But in the next 15 years, more than 1 billion additional people will live in this kind of cities. So this comes to us in a general idea or in a general insight, which is metropolises are becoming the most common typology of cities, of human settlements in the 21st century. You can see there in the graphic of the right the proportions in the next 15 years. For instance, metropolitan cities in 2035 will represent almost the 40% of the global population. That is much larger than the population living in other kind of cities, let's say no agglomerated cities, small cities and towns, which will correspond to 23.5%. So these are not small numbers. I mean, we definitely can, from evidence, can respond this statement that metropolises are the main typology of cities in the 21st century. And of course, we are starting to think how to approach metropolitan dynamics from SDGs. And this is a work that we started with Antonella and with the Polimi team, I think 2 years ago, before the pandemic. We started to analyze SDGs, the different goals, the different targets of the SDGs, and try to extract we call it keywords and related concepts, which are, I think, the philosophy, the essence between SDGs, between the targets, and try to shape some metropolitan realities and metropolitan dynamics from those SDGs. You have there some or a couple of examples. For instance, from SDG 1, of course, we can extract poverty as the keyword and some related concepts as extreme poverty, social protection, economic resources, basic services, resilient, and try to shape some or to represent some territorial realities through those related concepts and keywords in order to have a more general or abstract or mapping idea and how to link these sustainable development goals and the challenges that territories and that metropolises. I am not to take much time to explain this, but you can, of course, access to this handbook, and these articles in the link that I put in the presentation. I suppose that you will have access to this presentation before, and you can, of course, refer to all the resources that I will show you through. I will advance in the presentation. So that was my first point. Of course, the development challenges are global, but also are metropolitan. So the second point is we live in a world of small and intermediate metropolises. And I think that we can start to be in polemic here. And to start to understand what are referring as metropolis, we have to understand metropolis from their geography, reality, from the territory. What is the metropolis of the 21st century, and what is the difference between the metropolis of the century and the metropolis of the past? And as I said before, in the past, when we hear about metropolis, we mainly imagine big cities and large cities, but really today we can see that metropolis are referring not to a population numbers, not to a political geography, but to a functional geography. So, of course, there are several ways and concepts to understand metropolises around the world, and they also depend on legal, cultural, administrative, economic context. But we can have like a general agreement saying that metropolises are cities, of course, but cities that are related to this proximity or these surroundings that we call the commuting zone, which is, of course, suburban, peri-urban, and rural territories around the city that are connected. that have some kind of territorial interdependencies. These interdependencies, these linkages can be economic, can be social, or can be, of course, environmental. But the general characteristic of the metropolis of the 21st century is that are connected cities. This is the map that you saw this morning, the metropolis of Milan and all the surrounding, for instance, Piacenza, Parma, and so on. And you can, of course, start to extract some linkages between the territory. We can see also this maybe more clearly in these political maps. This is a reality that happened in all the world. We can see here three different examples on the functional geography of the metropolis. First one, we have a metropolis in Colombia, which is Bucaramanga, the metropolitan area of Bucaramanga, which is a small metropolis, 1.2 million people. And you can see that the territory, the urban territory, surpassed the political local boundary. And that is the main characteristic of the metropolis. We call it this statistically of the city proper, the center of the city, the most local division, which is the yellow territory in the maps. That is the city proper. And one characteristic of the functional geography of this metropolis is that all metropolises already surpassed that city proper. You can see it in Delhi, for instance, a mega city, approximately 30 million people, but you can see it also, for instance, in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, another small metropolis, about 1.5 million people. All those different size metropolis have the same territorial and geographic characteristic, which is that the territorial dynamics surpasses the city proper, the more local administrative division. So definitely we from UNHABITAT are trying to promote this insight of we need to change from a political geography to a functional geography. We need really to stop to understand cities on how they were divided in the past, and to start to understand this and how they can be used in the future. Because at the end, citizens don't care how cities are divided, but they care how they can be used and how cities can, of course, offer opportunities and development and quality life context. So, leaving the definitions behind, let's explore some more detailed numbers. So we have done from almost 2,000 metropolis, only 85 in the world are big or large cities, which are the red dots in the map. You can see the red dots correspond with a metropolis with 10 million or more, which has a total of 34 today. And then you have the orange dots, which correspond to metropolis of 5 to 10 million of inhabitants, which has about 50 or so on. In total, you have only 85 metropolises with more than 5 million people. The rest of the almost 2,000 metropolises are really small metropolises. So in the opposite that we think or we thought in the past, the world is not becoming a world of big cities. And this is polemic because this is an idea that we use it to hear, that the world is becoming in a world of big and large cities. The evidence shows us the opposite. The world is becoming a world of small and intermediate cities and metropolises. And this will be the same in the next year. By 2035, there will arise only 14 new megacities, while 450 other size metropolises. So in the 2035, we will have almost 50 megacities, but all the other cities will be small and medium metropolises, and this will be a common characteristic of all regions in the world. not only Europe and North America and Asia, but all regions in the world will have the same characteristic and the same distribution. Of course, that the war will occur mainly in Asia Pacific, and I said before, but also Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean are some regions that have some opportunity of growth in the next years. Regions as Europe and North America are almost stabilized in both population growth and also urbanization and metropolitan growth. This is, we saw some global trends, but we have now some zooming in Western Europe and other states. You can see in the map what I told you before, that in this group we consider not only Western Europe, but also Canada, USA, and Australia. And this is mainly the general distribution of this group. 325 metropolises, only 3 metropolises with more than 10 million inhabitants, which are London, New York, and Los Angeles. Then you have 11 metropolises between 5 and 10 million inhabitants, and you have 18 metropolises between 1 and 5 million, and 231 metropolises between 300,000 inhabitants and 1 million. You can see also there the countries with more metropolises, which of course means that they are countries that have a polycentric system of cities, which are USA with more than 100 metropolises, almost 150 metropolises. And then you have Italy in the second place with, I think, I hope this will be right, you can correct me at the end, but I think that you have 32 metropolis, then you have UK with 28, and so on. And at the right of the slide, you can see also the graphs with the population growth and with the metropolitan population growth, the average annual growth in the coming years. And you can see that, of course, the net of the numbers will increase in almost 50 million people in the next 15 years, but the average, the annual average, is decreasing, and it's decreasing fast. So the last between 2000 and 2020, this group have an annual average of growth of 1.25, and in the next 15 years, this will be less than 1%, so 0.77 of annual growth rate in Western Europe and other states. So, of course, in net numbers, the population is still increasing, but in percentage, it will be decreasing and faster. So this is, of course, insight or a hint that the population growth is stabilizing in the mostly of the world, but of course, mainly in this region. So that was my second message, or my second point. The world is becoming a world of intermediate and small metropolises, and not a world of big cities. So the third message, or the third point, is how metropolises and how can these kind of cities overcoming global crisis. And I think that, of course, we have some hints with the COVID-19 pandemic. Because we realized it and we saw that global crises do not recognize political boundaries. So nor the pandemics, nor the climate change, the migration, the declining of democracy, and neither of those recognize political boundaries. The COVID-19 pandemic advanced without caring for municipal or regional or national boundaries, and of course, one of the most important lessons that we had from the COVID-19 pandemic is that no city and no country can overcome this crisis alone. So, of course, that we need to work together. We need a new governance approaches based on cooperation, on collective action, of territorial integration to overcome this kind of crisis today. The pandemic, of course, the negative impact of the pandemics are decreasing, but for instance, they are increasing another negative impacts or another sustainable challenge, such as climate change, for instance. We took, and to try to understand this in a more detailed way, we took a sample nearly of 200 governance arrangements around the world in 80 countries, where local, subnational, and national governments worked together and intervened during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the principal result of this analysis is that metropolitan governance played a facilitating role, serving as a hinge, for local governments and subnational governments working together. We saw that in those places where metropolitan arrangements were set at the beginning of the pandemic, the actions to address the COVID-19 get faster to a more extended population and more extended territories. So those cities where metropolises worked together could address in a optimus way the pandemic and their negative consequences. All these analysis and all these results are published in this report, which I said before correspond to the title of the summer school, Cities and Pandemics Towards a More Just, Green, and Healthy Future. You can download it for free in our webpage. There is the link. Also, you can also refer to these materials. And the important lesson from this is it's different authorities at different territorial scales must recognize the need for more integrated, cooperative, and multi-level governance approaches. Of course, emphasizing on flexible and innovative institutional and financial and planning and legislative frameworks, but of course centered or focused in this notion of working together, of cooperation, and of collective action. So this is my last point. I hope to don't be boring you. What are the lessons at the end? What are the lessons for this decade of action for implementing the SDGs? And remember that in September 2019, the Secretary General of the United Nations called this last 10 years from 2020 to 2030 as the decade of action to achieve SDG. And these actions means local, national, regional, and global action. So any of us can contribute to achieve the SDGs. So how can we do it? Let's see some lessons from the pandemic and from the recent metropolization process. The lessons are 10 and are divided in three main categories. The first one is the governance lessons, which correspond to three different insights or ideas. You can see it there in the slide. The first one is about, of course, cooperation. No, as I said before, no country or city, regardless of its political and social economic context, was able to tackle the crisis alone. So collective action must be at the center. Some cities try, but the result actually they try to overcome the crisis and the pandemic alone resulted in a renaissance of the national sentiments and diminish of social responsibilities. And of course, for instance, as the pandemic progressed, more national governments and local authorities understood that they depend not only on their peers, but also on multiple social actors to design and to implement mitigation, adaptation, and reactivation measures. So, although cooperative work took a long time to start, and there are some countries and cities that still do not do it in an efficient way, increasing the negative effects of the pandemic in the territories, definitely we need to strengthen existing cooperative systems, both globally and locally. And this is also an important important lesson for us in the international community, because we realized that international cooperation is most urgent than any time before. So the second lesson is related to participation, and it is about all the cycle of participation, because definitely when we talk about participation, consulting is not enough. So the weakening of democracy persisted during the pandemic, right? The protests and the popular movement continued their work in many metropolises and countries where they had been present even before the pandemic, even the arrival of COVID-19. But in some cities, new protests began due to the impact caused by the restriction imposed for the governments to curb the virus. So, of course, people is upset. There are the communities are not agreeing with mainly of the institutional and formal approaches, and we start to analyze why. And we saw that, of course, listening and consulting with the disconnected population is the first step to addressing this concern, but is not enough. So local, subnational, and national governments must address the needs of the population and reach agreements with all social sectors and include specific solutions in public policies, in plan, and in projects. So consulting is not enough, but also contribution is necessary. The third lessons about governance for this decade of action of SDGs is about metropolises. And we really think that some approaches to urbanizations could be outdated. When we think and work on global urbanization, some approaches could be outdated. I mean, COVID-19 shone a light on metropolitan governance as a necessary approach to advance towards sustainable development. So, municipal management disconnected from its surroundings, that of course perhaps was useful at some point in the last century, now today in this new reality looks very outdated. We need local governments that care for working together. The territorial management cannot be only related anymore to municipal management, but we need overmore a cooperative, a metropolitan, a regional approach. Next group of the lessons, the policy lessons, and these are very interesting as well. And the first one is about inequity. The most affected people are still the same. So women and girls, children and youth people, the elderly, the disabled, the poorest people, including those living in slums in many countries around the world, and in informal housing in cities of developing and less developed countries. The most vulnerable communities were the most affected by the multiple crises unleashed by the pandemic. So, for instance, violence against women and girls increased during the long quarantines, but also children and youth without internet access were unable to continue studying from home. Of course, this is also applying for rural and disconnected communities, where the economic sustainability were putting in a edge from the pandemic. So actually, all these affections in the more vulnerable population of the world caused a setback in the partial achievements of the SDGs reached before the pandemic. So even some UN reports calculate this setback in 2 or 3 decades in some specific topics as education, poverty, and health. So definitely we need care about the most affected people, the most vulnerable population. So COVID-19 showed that it is urgent to put greater emphasis on reducing socioeconomic inequalities around the world if we want to build more sustainable societies. Of course. And we in the international community most definitely find formulas to a more equitable distribution of wealth and economic resources. The next lesson, about the fifth, about prosperity. We need multidimensional visions for urban development. So at this point, after the pandemic, or in the last stage of the pandemic, governments of all levels are reviewing their medium and long-term development vision because the negative effects of COVID-19. So international organizations, UN, OECD, and others have been emphatic in highlighting that those visions, those new development visions, must mainstreaming principles included in the global development agendas. For instance, solidarity, responsibility, cooperation, and collective action. And of course, we need also multidimensional visions of prosperity, not only economic prosperity, as prosperity was also understood in the past, but also multidimensional visions that care about environment, that care about quality of life, that care about planning principles, and so on. So we need multidimensional visions. The next one, digitalization. Definitely, this is very interesting for me because we found that on digitalization, we should definitely be cautious. So, of course, that COVID-19 means a new impetus for the digital revolution, and that metropolitan, local, national authority use the virtuality as a new reality. But the reality is that millions of people in different parts of the world could not achieve or could not access to those digital means because actually children and young people do not continue their classes, companies went to bankrupt, and people lose their incomes due to not being able to access remote work modalities, and some public services or even were suspended because not all cities were prepared to address this new digital revolution. So, in the post-pandemic, we need to assure that digitalization is a gradual and equitable change, reducing the digital divide in the territories, especially in less development countries and developing countries, and in general, avoiding a repeat of the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution was the last revolution that left millions of people behind. So we need to avoid that comes to this new digital revolution. If we do not manage this revolution in a good way, maybe also we will be leaving also millions of people behind. The last lesson of this group, the recovery. Metropolises will change the future. Definitely, and you maybe hear these all days that cities and local governments are in the front line of the response to the COVID-19. And of course, they have had the highest number of positive cases and the highest negative impacts. But it is also well known that metropolises are engine of productivity, attracting thousands of people searching for new opportunities. So their accumulation of social capital makes the metropolises engines to generate ideas, knowledge, and innovation. So when well managed, can accelerate the production of sustainability solutions. If we learn to manage in a good way all the inputs that metropolises offer to us, we can definitely find hubs of sustainable development in those kind of cities. So in this sense, I like it a lot to promote and to recover this idea of Antonella on a new metropolitan discipline, but definitely a new discipline that understands cities from the linkages and the interdependencies with the surroundings, and that a discipline that train urban practitioners and decision makers around these principles is definitely essential for an effective recovery that allow us to build back better, but also to shape healthier, greener, and fair urban futures, right? And the last slide, and I promise you that I finish here, are the more SDG related lessons, which are also three. The first one is about SDG territorialization, the subject that brings us together today. Subnational levels are key for advancing sustainability. So we saw it before, right? With the data and with the numbers. Metropolises are becoming the most representative type of city of the 21st century, to the extent that they concentrate more of the global population and 1/3 of humanity. So we need, of course, or we know, of course, that the quality of life of many millions of people is depending of a proper metropolitan and regional management. So this becoming particularly evident during the pandemic because restriction of the flow of people's goods, services through the urban-rural continuum put entire regions in the edge, in a bind. Many people could not access to food or to provisions or to the regional and country and global economic markets for avoiding these flows between cities and metropolises and their surroundings. So we need to review medium and long-term development visions for the post-pandemic, but also this review sets an ideal scenario for the territorialization and for increasing the profile of subnational and metropolitan governments in sustainable development. The next one is about the new urban agenda. Maybe you have heard before about the new urban agenda. The new urban agenda is mainly about city diplomacy. And the lesson here is that city diplomacy is key for the future of multilateralism. Of course, that direct cooperation between cities, the exchange of knowledge and lessons and feedback on urban policy implementation were very useful during the pandemic. But also the articulation with other levels of government, including the national level, which is actually the natural level for multilateralism and for international cooperation. But we know that traditional multilateral organizations should include international network of cities, international networks of subnational governments in global decision-making scenario. This was definitely a lesson learned from the pandemic. Cities working together around the globe are maybe sometimes more efficient than countries working together, okay? And the last lessons is about COVID-19 and about the global impact of COVID-19. And this is the global pandemic is, of course, a very worrying crisis, but it is just a first call for action. So world leaders are urgently calling for a new social contract from the pandemic and a new global deal for a new era. So we need whole of society and whole of government approaches becoming fundamental conditions for achieving those changes and those new social and global deals. So if we do not take a COVID-19 pandemic as a proof that our current development models are unsustainable and require urgent structural changes, then we will not have learned anything from this first warning call at all. So I think that that's this was my 4 points. I hope you are still here, and I hope don't being boring you with this intervention. I get back the talk and the floor to Antonella, to Sara, and to another participants for. I think that more for a questions and answer. I would like also to hear your opinions, your insight. Maybe you can say me, no, this is totally wrong. I don't think that the world is becoming urban or metropolitan. I don't think that we need new approaches for cooperation and for governance. Maybe to share your insights and your reactions to these 4 points. But of course, if you have some questions, I can also try to address them. Over to you, Antonella.
Thank you very much, Rafa, for this very vast overview regarding Metro Hub Initiative and UNHABITAT activity. As you can imagine, I have a lot of reaction and question, but I really would like to leave the floor to my colleagues and in particular the colleagues that are dealing with SDGs with their students and in their courses, and also leave the floor for the student that would like to understand better some issue and some questions that you present. So I don't know if Michele already have recollect some comment or question, or if my colleagues would like to open the dialogue with you.
There is an hand by Fabiano, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you, Fabiano.
Thank you, Antonella. Thank you very much, Rafael, for your very interesting talk. I've got, well, a few thoughts that I would like to hear your opinion on. My voice is failing me now. And they will probably end up with a question each. The first one is regarding the very definition, and you posed at the beginning how difficult it is to define a metropolis. Now, what is a metropolis? What is a metropolitan region? So the Eurostat talks about city, greater city, functional urban areas, and so on. And it strikes me that in a way, to talk about a small metropolis in a traditional sense, it's almost like an oxymoron, because the very idea of the metropolis appears in planning as the great city, and all the joys and the troubles that the great city puts to us. And it seems to me that the metropolis, or the bigness within the definition, seems to be going elsewhere to other definitions, like the mega city, mega region, and so on. So I was wondering, if we take a loose definition of metropolis, in the sense that we live in a world that is more and more interconnected. So it's very difficult, in fact, to find a town that is not really connected to a main city. If we start then calling everything a metropolis, I mean, there is a risk. That the question is essentially if you think that there might be a risk that then we start calling everything a metropolis, and therefore losing the very precision in the definition of the term. Or do we need another term? Do we need to think more precisely about what a metropolis is, and perhaps as opposed to its metropolitan region? So that's the first one. So the second one is also again on the question of metropolis, and the item 7 of the list, then the metropolis will change the future. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how COVID and the potential dispersion of the population into rural and suburban areas may potentially challenge that, or at least give a different tone to what's that role of the metropolis may be. And then on that as well, I was also thinking about whether, or not whether, but also on how we can ensure that we don't lose the other scales. So ensuring that we are talking at cross-scale interactions that go also beyond the metropolitan regions, the regional, the national, etc. So if a focus or perhaps a too-centered focus on the idea of the metropolis may potentially challenge cross-scale interactions that go beyond the metropolis. Well, some initial reflections. Thank you.
Wow.
Know if we can take a couple of reactions more, and then I can reply to all of them at the end.
I think that there is Sara Protasoni that raised her hand.
Okay. Thank you for your very inspiring contribution. I bring here questions and doubts that are very personal and are very strong in this period immediately after the pandemics in relation to the big frame that you have brought here today. And I would like really to hear what is your possible answer to these doubts where I really have problems to find an answer. So for sure, the metropolitan approach is based, and it's something, it is happening, and we have to start to learn. And for sure, all what it is defined within the keyword of the SDGs, it is something that it is now ethically leading our work as architects in relation with what is going on in the reality. And I also think that the lessons you have brought us today are very intriguing, but I have two main doubts. The first one is somehow the SDGs are defined on a global level, and somehow at the end they pertain more to the ethical dimension of our work, and the structural condition of our work are, of course, so different that somehow it requires a big effort to us to understand what could be obtained or what not in relation with the specific local condition. So my first question is, in which way you deal with the fact that immediately the definition of the SDGs and these ethical goals somehow requires a work which is also ending in something that I would define as a political work, which means which actions are necessary to be performed to reach the goal in relation to the structural condition and to also the, as you say, legal condition and administrative condition. So the first question is the political actions. What is the relation? I'm sorry, maybe it looks a little bit naive, but it's something I would like to reflect about. The second question, which became very evident after the pandemic, it is also the question of our technical role within this incredibly large and complex processes. Because once we say that cooperation and participation are two goals that have to be performed to reach the SDGs, immediately we crash with the question that the awareness and the knowledge today are not really shared. And the pandemic this was very evident. Very often we had the decisions which were defined as technical decisions that we know were not really technical decisions, were really strong political decisions. This is even stronger once we work with the urban structures and we work as architect. So my second question is how you deal with this question of the definition of our technical function within these big processes, which is somehow a function which is somehow divided between the global awareness of the processes, the local conditions, and which role we can really play in this. I think in this, probably our workshop will be very interesting because in a way it is something which is starting from the ground to experiment this. But somehow this second question of the technical role of our presence within this process, it is also something I would like to reflect with you about. Thank you.
Antonella, Rafa, can we collect also a comment by the colleague from the School of Toulouse, Juan Carlos? Juan Carlos, can you give us your comment? Because he has written me, but we can try also with him directly. Okay, maybe there is some problem with the mic. Anyway, I can read his comment also because it's related with the other comment by one student. So Juan Carlos is wondering about. He wrote the pandemic has also caused the population to move into less dense areas. Are the data from the past projections still relevant and still valid? Or we need to work about the new data is something also also Fabiano was mentioning. And then we have the first comment by students. So the atelier number 3 is winning the award. Di Cheng Yang, I can read the comment. I'm wondering what's the role is related with the previous comment. I'm wondering what's the role of the countryside playing during the Metropolitan. Will countryside gaining more freedom in independent development or still playing a contributor or sacrificing subject towards city expanding and development? So this question about rural, urban in the metropolitan conditioning we're mentioning. I guess, Rafa, you have a lot of things to say.
Okay, I was thinking in some initial points because I am afraid, and I have to confess that those are all very difficult questions. I'm afraid I don't have answers, but I'm trying to make some reflections on that. Let me start with the more easily one, the data, Juan Carlos, which has, is the data still valid or we need to work in new data? This is, we need to consider that these are global and long trends. So urbanization process is not a phenomenon of the last 5 or 10 or 20 years, but of the last at least 5 centuries or so on. At least, I mean, Antonella will say, no, this is from Roma. Okay, so we are speaking about long-term process and long-term trends on human development. So I would like to connect this with Fabiano, right? How permanent will be this change of people going from cities to the peri-urban or rural territories or small towns? What we saw in the first wave of the pandemic is that situation was very common. Many people, and I am talking about thousands and maybe millions of people, were going from cities to the countryside. And then when people realize that this will be a reality for at least 2 or 3 years, people starting to get back to the cities. So in the first wave, and this was a global process, in the first wave of the pandemic, millions of people went from cities to the rural territories. But after 6 months, after 8 months, after 1 year, people starting to get back. And this is interesting. And this take us more to what is the added value of cities. We started to think it again on the added value of cities. Why people prefer to be, let's say, agglomerated and let's say to be exposed to more risks, but they prefer to be in cities. Why? Because definitely cities are a hub of opportunities. I'd like to say something about the rural life and the disconnection. The bad thing is not being rural, but the bad thing is being disconnected from the opportunities of development. So in Europe, in US, maybe in Canada, there are some cities that can connect their surroundings in a very optimal way. So you can go from the center of the cities to the small town near to the city in 30 minutes or 45 minutes or less than an hour or so on. But in the mostly of less development and developing countries, this is not possible. You take or it's very difficult to access to some rural communities and rural territories. The transport is not efficient as in other developed countries and developed regions. So this disconnection presented, and this is an important difference between the developing and developed world, that the developing is more disconnected, and definitely this impact the population dynamics. People and mostly in developing and less developing countries continue to searching opportunities in cities, and they even prefer be exposed to most risks. And I am not talking about only the pandemic, but of course the violence risks, the discrimination risk in cities, that being disconnected in the countryside. So I cannot assure how permanent will be this situation, but I can tell you that this reverted in the first months of the pandemic. People get back to cities, and for that reason, I think that we don't need a specific data in this moment. Maybe we need new data in the next 2 or 5 years to really analyze and to really evaluate how this pandemic, when we'll be finished, if really changed or not the population dynamics and the urban-rural migration dynamics. I suspect that there will be no changes because this already happened in the past. We have going through several pandemics even in the recent past, and always the change was was to strengthen the city before after the pandemic. So and this is also reported in the cities and pandemic study that I showed before, how different pandemics in the recent past have strengthened, have evolved, and have changed the cities. And the result was always the same: more people going to cities. More people going to cities, even with pandemics and other sustainable challenges. So this can like us or not, but this is the global trend, and this is a very long-term trend. I am speaking about the trend of decades and even a trend of centuries. However, we from United Nations used to revisit this global progression every 4 years. This data that I showed you before was from the UN urbanization prospects from 2018. So in next year, 2022, we will have a new data set of world urbanization prospects. So we will check, of course, if these numbers and these projections to the next 15 or 20 years will change next year with the new data sets. But I suspect that there will be not changes, or not important changes in that sense, in the sense of more people going to cities and more cities becoming really a metropolises. And let me to reflect also in this definition of metropolises, which was another question from Fabiano. What is the first, for me, it's very difficult to find a proper definition, even from cities. When you ask to me, what is a city? I can really don't reply to you exactly what is a city, because even there are not global definitions or global concepts about what is a city. So you can find, even for cities, very diverse and different definition based on political, legal, economic and cultural frameworks. So this is the same for metropolises. But I like it to maybe to overcome some common myths. For instance, the myth of thresholds. And this is very polemic because, for instance, in the past, in ancient cities, we usually call Roma as a metropolis, but Roma in the ancient history was a city of 300,000 inhabitants, as there are almost 2,000 cities today, 2,000 metropolis. But with the time, we started to increase and to increase and to increase those thresholds. So I don't like to be based on thresholds for defining cities or territories or metropolises. And in that sense, we are trying to promoting a more functional definition, as I presented before. This is not a definition of urban population. This is not a definition of territorial extension, not even a definition based on the local governments or local administrative division within a city or within a metropolis, but it's more a geographical and a territorial definition. We understand metropolises as those cities that have several relations with their surroundings. We realize it in UN and in UNHABITAT in particular, that we cannot continue understanding cities as isolated islands. We need to start to understand cities as connected territories, and we need, at the same time, we need to start to understand the territory as a continuum, not to promote a continuum, promoting this false dichotomy between the rural and the urban continuum, but try to understand the territory as a continuum. In that sense, for instance, also, we need to realize that more precious resources of cities come from the rural side. For instance, water, air, food, all of those, the majority of those resources are not producing in cities, but in the rural territory. And in that sense, what was saying, I don't remember, maybe Teaching Yang about the countryside and the relation, if maybe the countryside will gain more freedom and will be independent from cities, or will be a contributor and continue sacrificing for the city expanding. I will say none of those. Maybe we of course don't like to mention the word freedom. We talk about territories, but if we trying to understand territories as free territories, as no dependent territories, we also are not considering this situation of the continuum, right? So rural areas will not be free from cities, but cities will not be free from rural areas. Both will be connected, and this situation will increase during the coming decades. With more on each day, cities will be more dependent. I will say the opposite. Cities will be more dependent of rural areas than rural areas on cities. But of course, the reality will be that the population will come and will continue coming to cities. And maybe the last point about Sarah's insight on what is the political action needed to the SDG achievement, and maybe what can be the technical role of, for instance, the academy and other local actors on sustainable development. I will say that not only SDGs, but also MDGs. Remember that SDGs is an evolution from MDGs, which were the Millennium Development Goals adopted at the beginning of the millennium. That was also the first global commitment between member states of the United Nations to achieve similar and proportional condition of developments around the world. And this was always taught as a generational commitment and as a generational change. So that's why neither the MDGs nor the SDGs has time frames for 5 or for 10 years. All of those have time frames for 15, 20, or 30 years because they are understood as a generational commitment. So I think that in that sense, for instance, the role of academy is fundamental because if we from capacity building programs, from universities cannot train the new architects, the new practitioners, the new planners, the new politicians in the necessity of achieving not only the targets of the SDGs, but the necessity to change our paradigm about development. Remember that the lesson that I showed you before was SDGs are not important for having some targets. SDGs are important because they propose a new paradigm for development, a new paradigm which is multidimensional, which is not based only on consumption practices, but also, of course, on responsibility, of course, on environmental protection. Of course, they are centered not only in economic growth and in people growth, but also in the relation of people with the planet and with the other species that inhabit the planet. So I think that the role of universities, the technical role for sustainable development is to train, is to change the paradigm of new practitioners, of new politicians to overcome really these global challenges and to try to implement new and sustainable models of development. I know that I probably didn't reply any of the questions, but I try to apport and to propose more ideas for the debate.
Thank you, Rafa. Yes, I have to say that the metropolitan dimension for us is mostly an approach. It's a matter of fact that in a lot of institutions, they continue to speak about Metropolis as a conurbation. Otherwise, to consider Metropolis as a proper phenomena, urban fact, is a leaping scale that allows us to understand that Metropolis needs a structure. And I think that Rafa said something relevant. Metropolis needs a new social content that is related to a new kind of metropolitan citizenship that need symbols and sign that we can, as architect and urban design, we can mark on the territory. So I really think that as an approach that's not related to a definition, we pass a lot of time starting from Monteria event and in a lot of other situations trying to discuss what does it mean Metropolis in Far East country or in Latin American country. And at the end is the metropolitan dynamics that we are facing and we try to represent. So which kind of social content, if architect and urban designer are not able to structure and to give a civic image to that dimension, that means build, I don't want to say a metropolitan identity or a metropolitan genius loci, but a metropolitan awareness. That is something, and that approach, it's something that from my point of view is quite different from the Neil Brenner planetary urbanization, because it's absolutely not generic. And so that is my question for Rafa. How is it possible to produce in the frame of the Metropolitan approach and using the SDGs tool, how is it possible to contextualize the Metropolitan approach? I mean, how is it possible to use this principle when we are working in Latin America or when we are working in Far East? In Far East, for example, the metropolitan dimension is a matter of fact. The Dakota territory speaks about that urban-rural continuity. That is not the same in Latin America, for example, where nature is so powerful that produce a very strong continuity. So is it possible to contextualize these SDGs according to the different character of the metropolis around the world, from your point of view?
I think that we need to
There is also a
reflect.
question by Federico Misto. Maybe we can collect also his question. What do you think?
Oh, yes, please. Go ahead, Federico.
Federico.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Professor. Yes, Rafa, I had a brief question, because when you showed this map of the metropolises all over the world, I was looking to the fact that the metropolis of Milan wasn't shown as a more than 5 million inhabitant metropolis, while, for example, Barcelona and Madrid were shown as more than 5 million inhabitants metropolis. So I know that this is probably related to the fact of the metropolis, you said, as a connected net of cities that is surpassing the administrative boundaries, right? So we know that in Milan, the metropolitan area is limited in, let's say, theoretically to the metropolitan city of Milan, but actually there is a conurbation that is bigger than the Barcelona and the Madrid area, as far as I know, and I know Barcelona and Madrid quite well, more or less. So my question was, how in your work in the UNHABITAT and in MetroHub you face this issue of the fact that the administrative boundaries and the administrations don't collimate or are not the same as the real extension of the metropolis and the dynamics of the metropolis, as also the professor Contino was saying. So we framed this morning the problem of Piacenza in relation with Milan, Bologna, and Genova and Turin also. So as a center point for all the conurbation of the north Italian area, but actually they are belonging to different regions, and they are not, let's say, present in your frame, and as probably the metropolitan dynamics would suggest that they should be. So this was my question. How do you put in these different things and these differences together to try to force the action of the SDGs? Thanks.
I will start with Federico. That is a problem of international comparisons. Of course, that for having all these trends, and in the presentation, we will have also the link to the data booklet with all the details on the numbers and figures, and of course the data set for all the population trends of all the almost 22,000 metropolis that I showed. But I have to make a disclaimer, of course. This standardization of information to make the comparisons, the international comparisons, are based on on numbers, on national statistics that all the member states, that all the countries give to us. So, for instance, in the case of Barcelona that you mentioned, it is very clear to me because I was studying it in a recent past. They have 36 municipalities, which sum a total of 3.8 million people or so on. But you can see it in the map like a metropolis of more than 5 million. That's why, that is why the national government, the Spain government, in their national census and in their national statistics, understand Barcelona as a metropolitan region with more than 5 million people. So that numbers they give us to our population division, that numbers, and we base it our analysis on that number. So our analysis are based on the official data of all United Nations member states. Maybe, I am not sure, but maybe in the case of Milan, the government of Italy give or understand Milan as a metropolitan city with less than 5 million, no? Which is correspondent with the political administrative division and not with the territorial definition. And that is a problem because in different parts of the world, some governments can understand one definition and another governments understand another definition. So the international comparison is sometimes difficult. But I can tell you that all these numbers so need to be understood as minimal numbers. They maybe could be bigger. So we know that there are at least or almost 2,000 metropolises, which represent 2.6 billion people around the world. But they are living numbers. They are growing every day. And maybe when we achieve a better standardization of international comparison, we will have a more precise and exact definitions and numbers. But for today, we need to deal with this kind of proxies and different understandings of metropolises, which depend of national entities and national governments. And that's why also I think that the numbers serve us as an input, but really we need to go more deeper than the numbers, and that's why it is important to also understand the geography of the metropolises, right? As I said before, you can have the number, but the important thing is understand that cities today are not using as they were defined in the past. That is the main insight and the principal insight. Citizens today, and I refer to what Antonella was saying, citizens today use the different local administrative boundaries without caring about them. So all days around the world, citizens are going from a municipality to another municipality even without noting it. And that is important, and that is what we need to try to manage and to try to achieve. We need to manage territorial dynamics as they are connected and not as they are politically divided, because at the end, that doesn't care to the citizens, that doesn't care to climate change, that doesn't care to the pandemic. So in that sense, I think, Antonella, that for applying this approach, this metropolitan approach to sustainable development, we really need to care about management, the management of the territory. We cannot apply this approach without the proper management tools. And that's why, for instance, our approach from UNHABITAT is that we need at least some governance tools for that connected reality, some planning tools, some legal frameworks, and some financing mechanisms. At least that 4 categories, because if we don't have planning instruments like plan, project, programs, if we don't have governance systems government mechanisms as metropolitan institutions, councils, commissions, if we don't have legal frameworks to really take in a more proper way the management of the territory, and if we don't have financing mechanisms, we cannot manage that connected reality. So for what we need to apply the metropolitan approach to the sustainable development, we really need tools. We really need tools. We really need tools related with territorial management. And again, I think that universities and that capacity building programs have a fundamental role to play there, because it is the proper scenario to train the new practitioners in those tools. And I think that if we finish this course, this summer school, giving to the practitioners some of that of those tools and teaching to how to apply them, we will have an interesting advance in that regard.
Thank you.
Well, if you agree, I guess, with this suggestion and input and push by Rafa, I guess we can also close. What do you think about it?
I think that it was very long journey today.
We got the point with this last words by Rafa, yes.
Yes, and during the summer school, we will have other occasion to go deep into some tools related to other to the real territorialization of the SDGs and some practical key studies. So we also can learn how is it possible to go down into a real project using these tools and approach to complexity. That is for us the main reason to apply and to work considering the metropolitan dynamic as something that we can find all over the world, even at a very small scale. So thank you very much, Rafa. We promise that we will send to Metro Hub initiative also the final result of this summer school. I hope that when you have time, you would like to join us also during the other lecture of your colleagues. We will send you the calendar and all the information. The link is the same. And we really hope to see in presence very soon. And thank you very much for joining us this night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Antonella, Sara, Michelle, all. Thank you. This was very interesting for me. I also learned a couple of things that I think that is the idea, right? Not only that the participant learn from us, but also us learning from them. And please, of course, send me the final result of the workshops, and I will be very curious to check them and maybe to find opportunities to use them. And also I will try, of course, to connect to another lectures of my colleagues. I will do my best try for do it. And remember, this is my last insight and my last call. One of the things that we learned from the pandemic, and that I think that this caused the difference, is that no city alone, no country alone can address the challenges of sustainable development. We really need new approaches based on cooperation, on integration, on solidarity, and especially on collective action. And I think that all those elements are at the core of the metropolitan approaches. So thank you all for being here, and for I know that it's late to you, so have a good night, and hope to see you very soon. Bye bye.
Ciao, grazie a tutti.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night to everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.
We meet tomorrow. Ciao, bye bye.